Okay, where are we? So no, we don't care about that. This is our lecture for today, and I just want to open a command line argument, command line environment, which maybe at some point will just be oh, we got one here. But I want to make sure you can see this because this is what we're going to be doing our initial work in. So that should be a bit bigger. Tell me if you guys, if anything is like a little small on my screen, we want to know that ASAP. Cool. So yeah, the content for today, and it looks like we still have 2 hours to do this, which is more than we need, I think. But the goal is to get a basic Django server set up. And in order to do that, there's a fair amount of just like environment type stuff. Anytime you're setting up a new tool, there's often like, a set of commands you got to run that you probably don't quite know what they do yet. And it's just sort of, these are the steps to set up that thing. And I think for this lesson, it would probably be wise for us to all walk through it together in the sense that when I'm typing on the screen, I'll type so little at a time that we can all do it at the same time and see if things work. And if it's not working for you, if you try running some command like Python-m then something and it doesn't work, then actually call it out in class so we can kind of see, oh, okay, here's some issues you can have with setting up a Django project because you will encounter these issues.
And Benjamin,
yeah,
I just wanted to quickly mention that with the lesson yesterday using Python with Postgres, we had a cursory introduction to the Python virtual environment.
yes,
we were installing PsychoPG, but stepping through it in detail is definitely the thing to do.
Yes. So yeah, you guys did have to see it for other stuff already, and we apologize that we moved the SQL stuff to be before as opposed to after, but as a result, you hadn't necessarily seen the Python virtual environment. So we should talk about that for a second. So if I am in my command line, I can type Python, right? And, that's going to open Python, in this case, 3.10.9. I always forget how do I want to do this? No. Trying to get out of Python. There we go. Right. So how does it know what Python is? Well, we have commands like which type is a similar command, but I can say which Python, and it tells me, oh, well, somewhere you aliased the word Python to Python 3. And then I can say which Python 3, and it knows a specific spot. So this is my environment. This is my environment represents sort of my whole computer. It doesn't represent, it is my computer, or it is the operating system on my computer. And that means that I have commands like Python 3 just at the ready. And why do I have those commands ready? Well, because in our .bash RC or .bash profile or .z shell RC, we wrote some commands, including things that updated this thing called the path. So if I say echo $path, that should print this path variable. And it's kind of hard to read, but basically these are all the places it knows to look for programs up front. So basically this is our environment. And if I were to type, maybe Adam knows this, like if I were to type pip, how do I find out where pip is saving things?
Pip, there is stuff gets installed globally with pip. Yeah, but where it's saving things,
yeah,
I don't know that one off the top of my head. I'd be doing exactly what you're doing now. Yeah.
So it's not ultimately that important.
Config, maybe.
What was that?
Maybe config, pip -- config.
I see. Yeah, we could try it. Pip config. No, I'm not going to mess with it right now. I'm not just going to guess.
Pip shell and then package name.
What is that?
pip show than package name?
And I have to give a package name. I can't just say everything.
I don't
No,
know how
that,
to
yeah, that
check
definitely didn't
everything.
work. Pip show, well, I don't think I have Django downloaded, but pip show all, there's no. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, this would be if you had installed a specific package.
yeah, well, let's just try that. How about if I said pip install Django, that's correct, right? So as you see, I'm starting to download Django. And now if I say pip show
pip list -v.
pip list -v. Okay, cool. Pip list -v will show me everything I currently have installed. So I have a couple things installed here, and it's telling me where in /op/homebrew/lib/python 3.10. So I'm showing all this stuff to show you that your computer itself is an environment. It's not a virtual environment, it's the real environment. And what that means that it's an environment is that basically it's aware of a file system. It's aware that it has command, it knows to look for commands in certain places. And when it saves things, it saves them in certain places, and those things tend to have versions. So Python itself has a version, pip has a version, all of these packages have versions. So I say all this to give context to what a virtual environment is, because you can imagine you might be writing a project, right? And that project uses Python 3 and it relies on Django. And maybe this project is built over time and it's a good project and you don't want to move from it. But for whatever reason, let's say it's 10 years in the future, Python 4 came out and Django is now on version 10, but for whatever reason, you can't upgrade to those. You like what currently works, right? So the issue with just having everything downloaded on your actual environment is that you can't have a Django 4 and a Django 10 project side by side. You can't, I mean, you are going to run into complications around there being, or you desiring different version numbers of things. So the Python virtual environment idea means that a given file, or is that, no, that's not how it works. It's not based on a file, right? It's just you get to name an environment, and then whenever you enter into that environment, you're dealing with a whole new set of packages. So let me try that. The first thing I'm going to do to create that virtual environment is python -m venv, and then the name of the env. So venv just means virtual environment. -m, I think, is just a way of running Python files. And we give it a name. So I'm going to say python -m venv. See if we can see this. And the name of this environment, I'm just going to name it something like default or Django or something. Or I don't know. I mean, it's kind of difficult to know what to name it when you're naming your first one, but I'll make it called default. And it'll take a second. And then it created a file where I was. So you see there's a file called default there now. So it does seem to be based on a file, but actually that doesn't seem like it's in a great place. So I'm going to move default into Tango, into demos and notes. Sure, I'll just move it there for now. So I go into Tango, demos and notes. I have here this file called default. I can CD into default. And then once I am in there, let's make this seeable again. Once I'm in there, the next thing I do is now that I'm inside of that environment, I should have a bin folder. ls, I do have a bin folder. If I say ls bin, I'll see what's inside of that folder. Okay, so bin just stands for binary. It means that's where they're storing a bunch of files that are ready for your computer to run. They've already been like compiled or whatever. And I'm not entirely sure what each one of these colors mean, but basically these are files that I can execute or otherwise folders. And I'm going to type source, the environment name bin activate. So you see we have a couple things called activate here, but one just called activate. So I can say source, let me get that right, source activate, right? So what does the source function do, or the source command do? This is still bash, source comes from bash, and it just takes a given file and executes it in the same way that it does your .z shell rc or .bash profile. It's just executing a file so that it affects what your current environment is like. So I run that. It doesn't seem to like that. I wonder why. Oh, because I didn't actually go into bin. So I could do it from here. I could say source bin / activate. Okay. And now it ran that file. And notice we see, at least because my terminal is fancy, it says default here, and then a little Python symbol. So this tells us it is aware of the current Python environment. And now I wonder if I were to say which Python, okay, which Python 3. So it's still looking in the same place, but the point is that if I wanted to, like, I think it's just defaulting there now, but if I were to overwrite some of these basic things, they wouldn't affect my main environment. They just have to do with my virtual environment. And you see here, we have this idea that you can deactivate a virtual environment. But what I'm going to do is instead, I'm going to say pip install Django. And the idea is that we're installing Django in this current environment. Now, I believe if the way the Python virtual environment thing works is that if the version of Django I'm about to download for this project is the same and already exists in my main environment, it'll just use that. But if this were to be a specific older version of Python, which I'm not entirely sure how I would download that, but I would say like, I mean, it might be worth seeing. Like if I say like Python Django 1.0, like I wonder if it will understand that. No. Does anyone, Adam, off the top of your head, do you know how I can get a specific version of Django with pip install?
I would have to do a quick check.
Is it at? Nope.
It is double equals and then the version number as semver notation, like 1 dot whatever.
So I could just do that or something? No, I couldn't. Okay, well, 2.04 is a thing. Let's try that. Okay. So I just want to see here that if I say 2.0.4, I now just downloaded a kind of older version of Python. And notice what it says here. It's saying it sees you already have a given Python. It's uninstalling it, but it's installing it here. So if I were to say pip list right now, it knows that we're currently using we're currently using Django 2.0.4. But then if I say deactivate, right? Now you see over here, we're no longer in the default Python environment. So now if I say pip list, interesting, it's still saying the old version of Django. I would not expect that. Maybe I don't understand Python environment well enough. Yeah.
We could just, it might be we installed that version. I would have expected it to be a different version as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we may have just installed the version that we didn't think or done something with the environment activated or deactivated at the wrong time.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I'm not sure. I could tell you exactly how node modules and JavaScript does this, but I think you know as well as anyone, Adam, I'm not an expert in this. So I'm just trying to do some knowledge transfer based on what I know. But if we
you're on the right
can't
path
get
with
it, it's
this.
okay. I don't want to waste too much time. If we can't get it, it's okay. We don't need to like talk too much about it. But even though we can't demonstrate it, the point ultimately of Python virtual environments is that you could have a different virtual environment for different projects, and those different projects could maintain different version numbers of the same packages, and there would be no conflict. That's the whole point of it, just so that you could simultaneously have Django 1.0 and 2.0 and 3.0 on completely different projects, and updating one wouldn't affect the other. But let's not worry about that too much for now, because we don't have a project yet, and we're fine with all of our projects sharing modern Django. Okay, so where are we? We're still in this bin thing. So I'm gonna once again say source bin activate. Now I am in that default environment. And I do want to make sure I download Django. So I'm just going to say pip install Django, but notice I'm not going to give it a version number. When you don't give it a version number, it gets the most recent, what they call stable version. So often there's a cutting edge version for people who want to see the latest and greatest, but there's also usually bugs because it's ongoing development. But if I just do this, it's going to give me something that already exists. So it's saying we already have Django, but we have this old version of Django. I feel stupid now that I tried going that route. I want to uninstall something. And again, I don't know a lot of pip stuff. Can anyone, is it pip remove or?
Is there not like a pip upgrade or update or something like that?
Pip upgrade, that would be another good one, right? Because we don't just want to, right? So pip upgrade, can anyone quickly tell me what the command is here? Pip update? I don't think so, but
Why don't you just
think you
install
could
it
do
like
pip
you did the
helper.
2.04, but just put a more modern
Try.
version.
I could, yeah.
Do pip tac h and it'll tell you the commands.
Yeah, good
I would
point.
say just uninstall, pip uninstall Django, install it again.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it has an update.
Okay, uninstall. I thought I tried that, but I didn't see it. Maybe I tried remove or something. Pip uninstall Django. So we're saying, yes, we found this thing called Django and we're deleting it now. And now pip install Django. I should get, now I'm getting Django 4.17.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I had so the reason why the virtual environment isn't working, apparently you can't move the directory
Oh my
once
God.
it's created.
Interesting. So
You have to use a relocatable flag when creating the virtual environment. So that's why you were getting a lot of unexpected behavior.
okay, yeah. Well, that explains a lot.
You
I
might
thank
want to
you for telling me
recreate it.
that.
Yeah, I was really confused about what was going on.
Yeah. So even though we're not going to demonstrate it now, we might as well do it right. So basically, that's apparently a thing. You don't want to move around that that environment file once you create it. So where am I right now? I'm inside of that default thing. So I'm actually going to remove this thing called default. Then I'm going to deactivate. So now I'm no longer in that environment. And where am I? Let's just make a directory called week 5 day 4 intro Django. And we can go in there. And now that we're in here, let's do our Python -m then and the name of the virtual environment. I'm still going to call it default because we deleted that other one. It doesn't exist anymore. So we just did the same thing where now we have this file called default. And now I can say source, or maybe I might as well go into default first, but I'll go into default and then say, I don't know that I actually have to. I want to say source default /bin/activate. Okay, and now we are in that default environment. And now if I say pip list, I see I don't have anything, which makes sense because we're in a brand new environment. I don't have all that new stuff. I don't even have the most up-to-date pip, I'm finding out. So might as well run that. I'm a real sucker for running upgrades as they tell me to, although it's not always wise to do that, but I'm sure a lot of you relate. Cool, so we're in this default environment. And now if I say pip install Django, we're going to install Django locally. So now if I say pip list, we see Django and some other stuff it relied on is there. So the reason why there's more in there than just Django is because oftentimes packages rely on other packages and they all have to get downloaded. Cool. And now if I say, was it piplist-v? Like, how do I see where? Okay, cool. So now I see that where is Django located? It's not located in that like homebrew file that has everything. Instead, it's specifically located relative to that default environment folder thing we made. So everything it's doing, everything it's saving is relative to this current environment. So hopefully that explains things. I'm going to look at the chat real quick because I imagine there are questions about this. I didn't mean to do such a deep dive about the virtual environment thing, but it is good to understand why it exists. Yeah, I see some of you are telling me what to do. Chase is telling me it's not working. And whether it was with moving the folder. By the way, I really appreciate that you all looked it up because like, exactly, right? Like that is the skill, which is you see behavior. It's not what you expected. And the gap between seeing unexpected behavior and understanding why is often massive. And you'll have to Google or otherwise use a resource to find out. But so much of programming ends up being that, solving problems you didn't anticipate. Okay, so we have our Python virtual environment. We installed Django, or we installed Django as a dependency. So the next thing we're going to do is run Python-m Django. And this should run Django as a command, essentially. And I believe that is going to help us scaffold our site. So basically, Django is what we would call a framework as opposed to a library, meaning, you know, when you use CSV, for example, that's a good example of a library. That's just giving you some functions, right? But you're still writing all the code. A framework, even though there's no official distinction when something goes from being a library to a framework, what makes a framework is generally that it's going to be providing most of the code for you. And then you just kind of fill in the little bits that explain how your app works. But it's basically a program that does most of the heavy lifting for you, and you just provide little code snippets in there. So we're going to run Python-m Django. Let's see what happens. We see all of these possible, I guess, subcommands that Django supports. Okay. So of those subcommands, the one we care about is start project. And oftentimes you won't know this by heart, and it's not always obvious how you can autocomplete this stuff, right? So if I say Python-m Django, it doesn't really know how to autocomplete beyond that. It doesn't know what Django supports. So I just have to know a few commands that Django does support. But that thing up here, if we just type it in like this, it'll tell us what commands it supports, but still you got to do a little digging to find out exactly how to do what you need to do. And oftentimes the internet is going to be a better resource than typing in something like that. So it's going to be Python-m Django start project. Start project, one word, and then we give that project a name. So in this case, I guess we're giving it the name school. So what happens? Okay, well, now in this folder where we have default, we also have school. And I can go into school, and I have this manage.py file, and then I also have school, which is a folder, and I can go into school. And I see, I see there's a bunch of Python files here. So before we even move on, my attitude is we should open this up and look, because the idea is Django just provided us a lot of files. What are these files? So we're going to look at manage.py. So you could see they actually have good comments here kind of explaining what everything does. So they're saying that, you know, this manage.py file is supposed to be Django's own command line utility for doing things with this backend you're eventually going to create. And it has a main function. And without understanding it too much, it sounds like it's going to run some Django stuff for us. So let's see what is the next thing we're supposed to do here. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. But right, so we have this manage.py, which we haven't seen yet. So let's just see it, because it would be nice to see what that actually looks like. So if I were to run manage.py, I could write Python manage.py. And again, it's going to give us a bunch of things. It's saying, here's a bunch of subcommands you have: change password, create super user, you know, just all sorts of things that are supported by Django or that have to do with authentication, pretty advanced stuff, to be honest. So we know about that this manage.py exists right now, but we're not necessarily using it yet. And let's just look in school, because even if we don't understand it yet, it's kind of nice to see, okay, this is what it gave me. So let's not worry too much about the __ py cache. That's probably just to do with efficiency, and it does a little like compilation so things run faster after the first time. This is an empty file. Interesting. We'll learn about it. Again, they're just kind of giving us some basic code, and we don't quite know how this works yet. But the idea is that this is going to help us build that project. And whenever you're dealing with a framework, there's two ideas that's kind of distinguish some kind of frameworks from others. And those two ideas are convention versus configuration. So what that means basically is sometimes Django is just going to have a way it does things, and that's convention. You just have to know, oh, Python expects a file with the name urls.py. It must have a file called urls.py. That's a convention. Alternatively, things often use configuration. So in this case, we have a settings.py. It's probably expecting that settings.py. But within here, we're going to have all of these objects, or these objects that represent the current state of the project, or maybe some options we want to turn on or off, or things like that, or the name of the database or the database we are using. So that's that configuration part is how we're going to make it unique to us. Because, for example, we're not using SQLite, or we don't plan to. It made the assumption we are, but we can change that. That's not a convention that you can't change. It's offered to you to change within a configuration file. Okay, so we've seen what's here, but we don't quite understand it yet. Before moving on further, I see here it's telling us that we want to run pip freeze and then pet. Use that text redirect operator to go to requirements.txt. So first, let's just type pip freeze to see what's in there. I'm try to make this bigger. If I type pip freeze, interesting. So it prints to the console a list of all of the current requirements that this project has. So this is everything this project is aware of as a library it has access to that it's currently using. Even though we didn't install most of these, they just came along with Django. And this is what we would call the requirements file. So if someone were to download our project, before they could run our project, they would need to download all these different dependencies like Django, right? And instead of telling them, okay, we'll now run pip install Django, we can tell them to just run pip install -r, requirements.txt. And that would just install all the dependencies. So how do we create that requirements file? Well, the thing we're going to do is this text redirection operator. So we're going to just say print out, echo what's in pip freeze to the console, and then put that within a new file called requirements.txt. So we're going to do that. And as you see, just a file just popped up, requirements.txt. And indeed, it just has all those requirements that, we just saw in the output. And the whole point of this is that if someone downloads your project now, or like clones it from GitHub, and they want to get, they want to run your project, they need these dependencies. Instead of knowing your actual dependencies, they could just now write pip install -r and then that file requirements. And it's telling us that everything we just tried to install already is there, but that's because we started this project. But yeah, just wanted to point that out. Okay, and at this point, we're done with anything that has to do with the environment or Django, or any kind of packages. So I just want to pause for a minute. How do we feel about where we are? As in, do we feel like we can start a new Django project that we don't even understand from scratch, or do we want to go over those steps?
I was struggling to start up my virtual environment, but I have it now. So
okay. And it is worth seeing that this doesn't need to be so complex. Like, it really is just a handful of these things you need to do. So if it would be useful, anyone let me know if it would be useful for me to just run over those 5 steps again of like, how do you set up a new project? Okay, we're sure. We don't want to see setting up a project again. All right. I mean, if so, that is fair.
You've got some yeses in chat.
Oh, got some yeses in chat. Okay, well, I want to do it because just for my own understanding, it's good to see setting up a project because you have to do that, somewhat often. So I'm going to get out of here. And, imagine we had nothing in this file right now. So I'm going to remove recursively both default and school. And then I'm going to run deactivate, which is just going to get me out of that current environment. So now I'm back to normal world, right? And I can say pip list -v, and you see this is what pip is looking at. It's looking at the main environment. Okay, cool. So let's say I want to make a new Python project, right? The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, well, I'm in the right file now, and we found out this is important because we want to know our file before creating the environment. So first I want to create this local environment that is only going to be relevant to this project. So to do that, I'm going to say Python -m, then, and then the name of the environment. I think actually, I mean, we're calling this thing school apparently, so might as well call it something like school environment. I don't really know what the what people like to do here, but this is what I would do. Like I know now I only intend this for this project, and there it is. And now I'm going to write source, and then within school environment, we're going to have this bin activate, and that's how I start out being in this environment. And now that I see this here, I know that I'm in that environment. And now if I were to write pip list -v, I would see I don't have much in there, but also it's pointing to that file as opposed to the main environment. Cool. And so I have my environment. Cool. What's the next step? If I want to create a
You
Django
install
project, yep. I heard something.
You need to install Django.
Exactly right. So this new environment, fresh computer, basically. So let's now install Django in this new environment. We're installing Django. Cool. I'm not going to upgrade pip this time. Usually doesn't really matter. So now I have access to Django. If I were to say pip list -v, there's a bunch more in there, including Django. If I said which Django, I wonder what it would say. No, it doesn't understand that. But that's why I say Python -m Django, right? And that gives me all those different commands. The command I want is Python -m Django. What is it? Create project? Start project? Can anyone remind me? Start project. And then okay. So Django start project, one word, and then the name of the project. In this case, we're calling it school. And now I have both school environment and school. So basically I created the environment. I downloaded Django. I ran using Python. I ran Django with some subcommands to create a new project called school. And now I can go into school and I'm ready. Oh, and then the final thing is that, I mean, you will do this more than once as your project grows, but we want a requirements file in case we're sharing this with anyone. So we say pip freeze, and then am I doing the redirection in the right direction? Pip freeze, yes, and then we redirect that to something called requirements.txt. And now I'm ready to open this in VS Code and look at it. And from here, I'll just work in VS Code. But as you see, we're in the school environment. We're in our school folder. We have our requirements, and we're theoretically ready to go. Cool. So how do we feel about that? The steps of, we're not going to do it again, but if we have any questions, the steps of starting a new project. It's kind of involved. It's not trivially simple. There's a couple steps there. And it's okay if you don't understand all of them at this point, because just like setting up an environment, getting a Django project going, at first you don't need to know what everything does, and you'll probably never hit the day that you know what everything does.
Yeah, I just want to make sure
Yes.
for one thing. So the environment is just to keep the like the version of the stuff, the tools you're working with the same. Correct?
The requirements.txt.
No, like just being inside the environment you made, that's just for like version control for the tools you're using, right?
Yes, yeah. As far as I know, Virtual environments in Python is Python's solution to version control. I'm not very used to it because JavaScript does not use this idea. In JavaScript projects, generally, the way it works is every single project contains all of its own dependencies in a file called node modules. Python does it this way because as a result, they can like share a little more. So instead of basically multiple projects could share the same environment and then share all of those resources they have without re-downloading them. This is just basically yes, it's another solution to this general problem of version control. And you generally don't have to worry about it too much until you really do have 2 or 3 projects going at once that don't share the same requirements. So it sometimes, to me, it seems like overkill to introduce it so early, but it is an essential idea in the way that Python does things. So you kind of have to introduce it up front. Okay, well, I'm looking to give you guys a break in a minute, but before we go, I just want to see this Python manage.py run server thing. So we saw that we have this manage.py that's given to us by Django. So if I type Python manage.py, what happens? Well, it gives me, all these, it just tells me these are all these different subcommands you have. So the subcommand we cared about was run server. So Python manage.py, and then we're going to write run server. And what happens then? Okay, what do we have here? You have 18 unapplied migrations. Your project may not work properly. So basically, it's telling us that we didn't set up the database right because we didn't do that at all yet. And so it doesn't really understand, it's giving us kind of a bogus error based on the fact that we don't even have a database right now. And it says the development server is here. And I'm going to try and click on that development server. And now I go here and you see we are actually running a site. So up here in the URL, we see a couple things. We see this 127.0.0.1. I don't know if you've seen this yet, but this is just a weird, I don't know why it's like this, but this is how computers made certain decisions. This is an IP address. This IP address, 127.0.0.1, always represents your own computer. That can also just be called local host, which looks a little simpler, but you'll see it goes to the same place. And then this colon represents a port, and then 8000 is the specific port. Ports are just so that an operating system can have more than one, thing running, or have more than one thing accessible through localhost at the same time. And these numbers are pretty arbitrary, but basically there's no one on port 8000. So Django took port 8000. It's probably a default. And so now localhost port 8000 gets us our Django site. And just the fact that we're seeing something means it's working. If I were to look in here, I wonder if there's anything useful in the console. Sometimes there is. It's a little too small to see. There we go. So nothing really interesting there in the console. Let me check the console here. Cool. So there is some semi-interesting stuff in the console here where we're seeing that, ignore this stuff, this was just my keyboard. When we hit the site, a bunch of stuff happened. First, it was getting all these static files like CSS and different kinds of fonts. And then it tried to get a fave icon, which is like that little icon that, where is it? This little icon here is the fave icon. For Netflix, it's an N, right? So basically, we have a server going. And when that HTML page, when we hit / when we hit the URL where we're supposed to get our index.html from, it's sending it over, and then it's asking for all these additional resources in that HTML file. And then it sends them over. So I wonder if we could even see like somewhere in Django, oh, I guess we're here. Somewhere in Django, there must be, like if we look inside of school, oh, I see it tried to create a SQLite database. If we look inside of school, where is it actually? As in, I don't, admin.site.url. I want to see, where's index.js? Do you know that? Adam, like
Oh,
where
The,
or it's
or the
just
Python admin site or the homepage?
the page we just saw, yeah.
Yeah, that is a good question. I have not dug too far. I'm pretty sure what happens is Django installs a bunch of Django apps or modules or stuff for a lot of this sort of default Django magic that it gives us. And those get put somewhere else. And I actually don't know.
Okay, fair
know
enough.
where.
So we don't necessarily see exactly where the HTML is for this, but we just want to demonstrate this is a real website. It's not on the internet exactly, but we are using our own computer as a server. And then through the internet, this is not relevant to our file system. This is actually going onto the internet, going through all your network hardware, and then saying, oh, well, I was actually already in the right location, so let me look there first. But the fact that we see localhost 8000 here and we got an HTML page back means we are successfully running a server and serving something up. We just happen to also be the client in this case. So I feel like that's a good place to stop for the moment. When you come back, we'll get into the very basics of how a Django app works. But let's give you guys until 9:45 now. Sound good? All right, see you in a bit. everybody. We're coming back now. I realize I didn't pause the recording. I thought I did. So there'll just be some empty space in the recording. But yeah, let me just okay, I see myself, I see you guys. Cool. So where were we? Right. So let me just move some of these around. You guys don't need to see what I'm watching on Netflix. Right here, we have our markdown file in which we're talking about Django. And over here, I have this, you know, the actual website that we're serving open. And then I want to give myself another monitor. I don't know if you guys can see when I do that, but I want to have the, it's all jumping around a bit. We want to make sure that, we have our code, and I don't think I actually need my command line, but I just want to have my code around. So I can quickly jump between these. So basically we have the lecture content here. We have our actual code that we're running here, and notice this is running in real time. So I would have to do command, you know, C or D to get out of it. Otherwise it'll just keep running. And then over here we have the actual website, which, as you see, because I stopped running the server, if I reload, there's nothing there. Okay, so the next thing that our content here talks about is the idea of handling requests in URLs. So we did not write anything yet. If I go back here and I look at urls.py, you'll see that there is a lot already written here, and some of it is explaining how to do it. So, okay, we have some explanation here, and then we just have this URL patterns here. And then over here is this big file that I guess we wrote for you. And there's what to see in there, but maybe we'll get there a bit at a time. So what do we currently have? We have this thing called admin slash. And I mean, this explains the basics of how Django works, because Django is a backend for your web. It's a server. So whatever your web product is, this is your server. And the core idea of any server is going to be routing. So basically, given a URL, it's going to serve up some kind of site or otherwise respond to someone going to that URL by, you know, returning data to them or something. And we see right now that, you know, if I do run this, so let me make sure it's running. If I go here, this is working. So this represents slash, which is the root of our project. And that seems to be given to us for free. But what we're seeing here is that we actually already have some associations, which are, this is part of, you know, one of those conventions of Django. It must be in a file called urls.py. The variable must be called URL patterns. And then in the URL patterns, we have a list, and that list has, you know, uses this function called path, which we are getting from Django itself. So you see Django has a lot of useful little modules that you can import things from. And then in the path, or in this function, we have two parameters, two values that we pass in. One of them is the path off of our main URL. So off of slash, what might we add to it? And then we're going to associate it with a specific site. So I don't think we can actually see this site because it's coming from something built into Django, but it's called admin, and it has something called site in it. And in that, it has something called URL. So let's see if I actually click it. Okay, I mean, I don't fully understand this, but we don't need to worry about it right now. Okay, so what actually happens if we type slash admin here? Okay, well, even without signing into this, we see that first it changed the URL a little bit. It added something beyond slash login, this, you know, question mark next thing. But also it's served up a specific page. So that's all we really care about right now. And if we look here, we'll see that indeed we tried to go to, so up here was that original slash page. But then from there, we tried to go to slash admin. It seemed to understand it. We'll get into what all this means later, but essentially it understood it. It served up the page. And then there were some things that it relied on, and it served those up as well. So we do have a path already called admin. And now looking back at this code, what I would expect next is that we have some other kind of path. So right now I'm just seeing path admin. I'm assuming based on this, if we give it nothing, that means the root. So we're going to overwrite that default HTML page it gave with something like path root route handler. Okay, so we're going to add something here, and it's going to look like this. It's going to say, okay, well, that path admin exists, but what if we had a different path? And that path is, empty string, which means it's going to align with just slash. And what do we want to do in that case? Well, root route handler. What does that look like? We have one right here. It's a function that takes one input called request. Cool. So let me write that. I'll say root route handler. It's a good enough name. And then we have to define that. So we'll have to define it before URL patterns. But often, eventually, these will just be in a separate file and you'll import them. But let's define this root route handler. And as we said, it takes one input called request. And what I want to do is just print that request. I just want to see what that even looks like. What is this input? And then we see we eventually return a response to it. But for right now, I'm just going to return the simplest response I can think of, which I'm just going to write hello world. And I'm going to save it. Okay, and it wants me to install some stuff, whatever. Let me just get that over with quickly. Okay, so we're still serving up our server. So if I go here, I have, that same URL there. And now if I just do slash, now it should go to that new route handler. So what happens? Attribute error at slash. Okay, so I think the problem it's having is that what I returned was not HTML, but rather a string. So this is good to see, at least, that you can get, really explicit errors when you do something wrong in Django. But it looks like Django is not happy with my attempt to return a string. So we're going to go back here and looking at our example, we have this thing called response equals HTTP response. Okay, and that came from Django HTTP. So let's just copy that. So Django gave us another thing. And we'll add it up here. So this is another thing Django is giving us, HTTP response, and it's just an object, or sorry, it's the constructor for a class called HTTP response. So if we type this, this will give us something of type HTTP response. I still want to print out what's there, but now we're going to say, well, we actually have this response called HTTP response, which just has an H1 in it with some text. And that response is what we're going to return, because it'll probably like that more than it liked a string. So let's try that. As you could see here, well, actually, I think it got a little confused because I hit some stuff. But as you can see here, it's still running. So now I'm going to reload again. And now we see welcome to the internet. Cool. So what actually happened? Well, we wrote our first route, as in we have this thing in URL patterns, which I believe it's going to go one at a time and look, it's going to look for the first match it finds. And in this case, the one we had here, which I'm going to put at the top, that seems like a better place for it because it's the root. If we have just slash, which is represented by empty string, that is going to be handled by this function called root route handler, and the handler for any like that URL basically is responding to a request, and we're returning a response in response to that request. So as you saw, we went like the print right here. So what happened is we went to slash, it understood to link slash up to this function over here. Within this function, it actually got a parameter called request, and we print it. And it's not that complex, but we see that this response, this request, it probably has more to it, but at the very least, it understands that it's a get request, which we discuss a little bit later, and that request is a slash. Sorry, what was that? Someone say something? No?
That might have just been me typing.
Okay.
I apologize.
No worries. I don't know what it was, but right. So this is another, helper function that's going to create an HTTP file just with this, basic bit of HTML. Create an HTTP response, and we're giving it, HTML in the form of a string, and then we return it. So it might not seem like much, but basically we have a server now, which is pretty cool. We can respond to anything typed into a URL. It's going to match up to our URL, and then it's going to know to serve up a specific page based on this request. And this is the core idea. Like I could create, another path, and I might say, okay, well, this path is going to be called, just because it's our age-old joke, it's going to be called Pikachu. Why not? And what happens when I go to, I guess I want to add a slash to the end. What happens when I go to Pikachu slash, well, I want to go to my, this is a specific case. So I'm going to go to my Pikachu route handler. And that doesn't exist yet, so we'll have to define it. So I'm going to go to my Pikachu route handler. Well, let's get the whole thing there. Pikachu route handler, which again, it takes that request automatically because there's interesting stuff there that we might care about eventually. And then I can return whatever I want. But in this case, we're going to return just some HTML. And, in here, we will just write Pikachu. I want to make sure, I got to spell it right each time. Pikachu. And then notably, everything else we write in here will actually happen. So if I write print, the world is yours. Save it. Okay, it's still having an issue. I wonder why. Invalid syntax. Can anyone tell me why that's invalid syntax?
Comma after your Pikachu path.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, cool. So now it seems to be good again. And now if I go back here, I see like, okay, I could still go to slash. Nothing about that's changed. I could still go to admin, and that's some, built-in Django thing, but I could also go to Pikachu. I'm spelling it with a C first, right? Pikachu. And we got up a site. So it seems trivial, but don't worry about how complex the website is. A website is a website. The fact is we have enough now that we can match a URL to a specific thing we want to serve up. And not only that, we can actually, we can do anything within that handler. So while we eventually want to return something, we could also print the world is yours. And a more practical thing would not be to print the world is yours, but to say like, oh, first get something in the database, because that's going to matter for what we show on this page. And then you could build up the page, and then you finally send it back. So before moving on further, let's really understand this, because this is all there is. That is a web server, and it maybe shows you how much Django is really doing for you, because you barely had to write anything. But you can make a website just by, building up on this idea. I mean, you probably want to eventually save your HTML file somewhere, but you can now match up routes to resources, and that's the essence of a web server. Cool. So let's take any questions we have about what we've seen so far.
So you need a route handler for each path you make. Could they share a route handler, or is that bad practice? Or
they definitely could share a route handler if they were the same route. But it's hard to imagine what that situation might be. We're going to get into pretty soon a few more things you can do. Because for example, if I'm on a website, I might have something like Pikachu, right? And that's it. But even more likely, I'm going to have something like posts, right? Or I might have something like, user or something. And then after that, I won't just have another thing. I'll have user like 44 because that represents the actual user we care about in the database. And then maybe posts and then /101 because we're trying to view that specific post for that specific user or something. So we haven't seen this situation yet, but in this situation, we would definitely want to have something where we had the same route handler handling all things that look like this, but that 44 and that 101 are variable. We should be able to pick those off, and any, so a route that looked like this should probably use the same handler, even though it is a different URL. But we will get into that. But for right now, how do we feel about the basic idea of just like you set up that Django environment, and based on what's out of the box, you can hook up URLs, which remember are universal resource locators. You hook up a URL to a specific block of code represented by a function. Okay, well, I think we're doing okay. We haven't done too much yet. The setup part was more complicated than any of the code we've seen so far. But this is basically the essence of all frameworks, in the sense that we didn't write a lot, but we got a whole server, and that's cool. We didn't have to know that much about how it all worked. We just sort of relied on things it gave us, and we were able to very quickly and with very little code build up a server. The downside is that we don't really know how it works, and if we eventually encounter issues or we have questions, how do I accomplish this? It's not just how do I accomplish this, it's how do I accomplish this in Django, because you've sort of bought into Django at this point. You expect to do things in the Django way. There's probably a way to do anything you want to do, but your expertise now is not just about like learning how Python works or learning how the internet works. It's specifically, how does Django help me solve this problem? So that's the biggest downside to a framework, is you bought in pretty hard to doing things a specific way. But of course, the upside is you didn't have to write a server from scratch, and that would be a ton of work. Okay, so I mean, the rest of this lecture, before we get into the assignments, essentially consists of these different things we're showing you about, what you can do with a route. So notice the routes are at the bottom because we have to define those handlers first. Honestly, the way you would often do this, the better way is, no, we're not going to get into that. Basically, I was just going to show you, you often want to split it up into multiple files, but we don't have to do that right now. We've seen this route handler. So what does route route handler do here? Well, we're printing the request and the response, and we might as well see this. I mean, it's not a bad idea. So we're going to go back to our route route handler. I'm going to get rid of this Pikachu route handler because it's not particularly unique. And in the root one, I'm just going to copy paste what I took from there, which is not too different. Basically, every time we hit the site, it's going to have a request associated with it. And then eventually we're going to return a response. And what we're showing you here is just printing out using this dir function, the entire object, so you could see what it looks like. So I'm going to go here and I'll go to / and we still just see welcome to the internet. Not that interesting, but if I go back to my console here, we'll see a lot more because we printed all that out, right? So the first thing we printed was request. And as you see, request is just an object, but it has so many things in it that you could care about. For now, ignore the things that start with __, or even just underscore. That's usually a way of saying either it's built into Python or it's built into Django, but everything else is something that we expect, that they expect the user would directly care about and use. So accepts, for example, if we dug in there, we could see like, oh, this request accepts JSON or something. So basically they're asking us to return JSON. Because you designed both, you probably already know that, but basically you can dig into that HTTP request as much as you want because it might have things that matter to you. Like just all sorts of things might matter. And then same with that response. So, Django gave us this HTTP response class so we can make instances of it, but all that means is that it wraps things in such a way that it knows this is an HTTP response. It has all sorts of things you can set or read on it, and then it sends it back in a way that the web browser understands. So I don't necessarily want to see all this, but it's good to know it's there. So we know how to make a basic route handler now. And here's an example of another one. Let's see what this one does. We have another route handled by another route handler. And what does it do? Well, again, it's just giving us some HTML. And it's giving us we're explicitly setting a status code. And then maybe Adam can help me here. What is this? Adam, are you still here?
I am. I was just muted.
Yeah, can you, what is format here?
Yeah. This is one of the, every framework has its pros and cons in terms of syntax. What's happening there is let's see if I have this right. So the request object in Django is essentially an object. I'm pretty sure what happens is that when it's a GET request, the way that we can access the query parameters from the URL, which we can look at, or the query string, which we can look at in the browser in a minute, is with that capital GET. And that gives us a Django dictionary. And then, or something very similar to a Django dictionary. And then the other GET, the lowercase GET, is how we interact with this dictionary-like thing to get this query string format. So we could go to the URL in the browser, and in the query string, we could put, format there and give it a value. And if we want to do that, then we could see it printed out here.
Okay, but just so I understand, we're not using a query parameter anywhere here, right? There is no format parameter in the path associated with this handler, right?
That is correct. I think with Django, like everything after that question mark, I don't think we really deal with that in the path. It's sort of more up to us what we do with it if we want to get it from the request or not.
Okay, well, I'm not
And
positive I fully understand, but let me just actually see it run. So basically, we're creating a new path handler. Okay, we're creating a new path here and associating it with a new handler. So that path is another route. And here is our new handler that we will make, our own. So it's going over here. And these two are lining up now, but I don't even want to, right now we're going to we might as well see all this. So I'm going to save it. And the idea is that I should be able to go to another route and see what happens. So what happens? Well, I don't see anything personally, but now I'm going to go back here and look at it. And it says, okay, well, interesting. So we're seeing, we are going to another route. When we go to another route, we're giving this HTTP response with marquee. We can make as many routes as we want, but we didn't see anything, interestingly enough.
I think it was
showed
on the right side of the.
It was on the right.
Yeah, you changed off the window too soon.
It's on the right side. Oh, very cool. I didn't even know that was built into, you have that in HTML built in. That's what marquee is. That's brilliant.
It is like the antiquated thing that still exists in HTML.
Yeah, HTML tends to have a lot of interesting functionality. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if you want to, I always forget query string or query param. If you want to throw that question mark in the URL and put a format a query
Yeah, we'll
parameter
try that out.
format
We'll
and
try
then
that
give
out-
that a
that out in a
value.
minute.
Yeah,
Thank you.
but yeah, and thank you, whoever mentioned the marquee. I missed that as well. So thank you.
Cool, great. So we are actually returning that marquee thing, but notice we set a status code to 418. So I don't even know what 418 means, but anything in the
the-
400s. Yep.
It's the joke. It's the joke. I'm a teapot. It was
Oh,
like a
got
joke.
it. Okay. Well, anything in the 400s
Oh.
is supposed to mean an error.
That's actually, Benjamin, I had noticed I'm a teapot in the VS Code terminal and I didn't know where that was coming from.
Now we know. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we can look that up really quickly. If we type in HTTP status codes, note that these don't HTTP response status codes are just a convention. No one has to abide by them, but basically a browser will by default understand that if you send back a 200 to 299, that means success. This 300 means redirection, apparently. 400 means client error, meaning at their end there was a problem. 500 means the server broke while it was trying to respond. The most common thing you'll see by far is in the 400s, either 401 unauthorized, meaning you're not supposed to have access to this site because you didn't sign in or whatever. I actually don't really understand the difference between 401 and 403. 404 is the most common one, not found, meaning you got to the server, you looked for the URL, we didn't find anything. So let me return 404. And then apparently what was it for? Which one did we do with this?
418.
418.
418. Yeah. So apparently 418 is I'm a teapot. The server refuses okay. So, some joke that some funny programmer dude put into HTTP because it's all a joke. But anyways, most people don't know what a specific URL, a specific status code means. The only ones anyone knows by heart are like 404 generally. And then 200 meaning normal success. But yeah, the point is we were able to be explicit about the status code. And as a result, this printed differently. We saw some stuff here. It didn't actually make a difference at the other end, but we were able to set it. And then finally, when we try to print this, we got none. Okay, well, I do wonder, I mean, Adam, you can tell me, but it seems to me like this is this example just seems very strange because this should be the example for having a parameter. It shouldn't be here. So that's what it seems like to me. So so basically all we've demonstrated here, let's forget about this line. All we've demonstrated here is the idea of setting a status code. So the idea is there's more we can do than just what we've seen. And so if I said 404, I wonder what would happen. So status code of 404, right? The same exact page, we're giving back the same info, but if I reload it, what happens? Okay, we still see it. But if I were to look in here and I looked in the console, at least Chrome is aware we got a 404 back. It means not found. And normally when there's a 404, you'd have a website, you'd have like a specific HTML page to tell the user there's nothing here, you messed up. But the final thing we want to show you is this idea of a URL parameter. So what if I had a route handler like this? So we currently have, besides for admin, which we got for free, we have just slash, then slash another route. Well, what if we had something like slash another route slash string format? Well, that's an interesting point because I could use this other this other request thing called with params. I guess I should. And it will go like this.
I believe there are two ways to do it.
Meaning
the pass the params as an argument or not pass them, but access them through the request object.
Oh, I understand. Okay. So that is pretty interesting. Let me just make sure this
I
doesn't,
would agree with you that passing the params in the path makes sense because it's more explicit.
yeah. So, I mean, and like lots of things, there's multiple ways to do something. But the thing we want to see now is that if someone goes to another route, we're going to go to that thing up here, right? Another route handler, and it does this request. But it's actually a different URL if I say another route slash something. And what we wrote here is a way of saying whatever's there, I don't want the exact value. I want to represent it as a variable, and that variable is going to be of type string. So the idea is I'm gonna write here another route slash, maybe it's UTF-8 or something. So this represents some kind of format, or maybe it's a JSON. Who knows what this is for? But basically this string here represents a format. So I hit enter there, and you'll see that we lined up. It didn't match another route, and match another route slash, wildcard. And now if we go to with params, which it matches up to, oh, interesting. Very weird. Okay. So, I see that, we have this request, and we're able to match that variable here to an argument here. And we're giving it a default, in this case, H1. Interesting. This is starting to get very confusing to me how close these routes are, because that's implying that if I did just slash, that it would have by default H1, but it's actually going to get grabbed by a different route. So this is a pretty confusing example, to be honest. Yeah, I don't like this. I'm going to change.
I apologize. That's my bad. Yeah, you should change it and not have the format being stuck inside the HTML.
Yeah.
And we can print it out and look at it like normal people.
So now I understand it a little better. We're going to have a route called with route. I don't need to save it. I was confused. And let me just make sure. Okay, so we're going to save this. We have with route slash string format, and we see here that it's going to grab that format. And if that format is empty,
with route.
What was that?
Yeah, with params, not with route.
What?
If you type in your URL with route, it's not going to work because you're.
Oh, because I called it with param. Yeah, good point.
With param.
Very good. So if I type with param now, okay, didn't like that, and why not? Because
plural. Try params with an S.
Are you sure? I called it with param.
I lied. I'm sorry.
You didn't put a parameter. You need to put a string.
I know I didn't, but I thought that this would be a default value.
Now I believe
You still have to have something after the slash. Yeah.
it's the default value. The default value gets super confusing. The default value is not being applied in the path logic when it's figuring out which URL to deal with.
So how could I ever trigger the default value? As in, what would the URL be that triggers it?
I think you're probably right that default value is
doesn't mean anything.
Probably useless. Yeah.
Okay.
Before, when you typed in like JSON after it, it still went to H1 because there's no JSON tag in HTML. That's how you trigger the default value if it's an invalid HTML.
But then that should be eliminated. And I apologize, guys. This is we need to update a couple of things here.
Yeah. So I don't think that is true, because look, it's actually taking whatever that is and making it the element. So I don't think that default is doing anything. I don't think it can do anything.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So taking that out, and I mean, there's no reason you would want a default value generally for, I mean, if I wanted to, I don't know, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay. But anyways,
I would agree. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right. I have this format here. I'm just going to print it out to see it. And then we're going to return a response, which interestingly enough, we're going to use that format variable to represent the HTML element we want to return. So now I have a very interesting site where I can say, okay, well, I want this to be an H1. It'll be an H1. Okay, now I want it to be a pre. It's going to be a pre. And I guess that's just to show you that you could take in anything there and mess with it. I think more useful, we would have something like this, which would be like, maybe we would have users, and then we would have string instead of number, instead of string format, we would have like int, we would call it ID, and then I would call this user route handler. And then in here, I would write def user route handler request, and not just request, but I care about that ID. So I go like that. And what might I return? Well, I'm just going to return a dummy thing for now so that we can mess with it a little more. So let's just say in here, we don't need all this. We're literally just going to have, I don't know, a paragraph with nothing in it. I don't care. So right, this is what it's going to look like, my user route handler right now, but I do want to print out ID just to see that I'm getting it. And I also care about the type of the ID to make sure that it is the type I think it is. So let's try that. We called this route users, okay. Users, and notice if I just do users, it says, well, I don't know what that is, because we didn't define anything for users. We just defined something for users slash a specific value. So now I'm going to write 44, and I don't see anything because I just returned that empty P. But if I look here, it'll say, well, actually we have a 44 of class integer. And I do wonder also, let's say I tried to say like ABC here, what would happen? Okay, well, it actually breaks. And the reason it breaks is because if we look here, it's going to say, well, I was looking for users followed by an integer. I didn't see that. And there is no route for users slash ABC. So I just don't understand that. But it does understand 44. And then what might we want to do with that? Well, we have this ID of 44 now, and we know it's a number. So just imagine that, somewhere in this project, and it'll eventually be in a database, but just in this project, we have a list of users, right? So I have, a variable called users, and it's a big thing, and it contains all of my users. But let's just say we're going to make a list out of range 100. And this is going to be a big list with 100 things in it. And then I'm going to say, just to demonstrate, I'm going to say user number, 44 is equal to, and you know what, we're not even going to make a big user out of it. They're just going to have a name. And then similarly, this list with 100 elements in it, I can say, okay, well, actually, users 21 is going to be equal to Adam Kahan. Cool. And so we're just pretending right now that I have some kind of, data called users. And that being the case, I should now be able to say, okay, well, this specific user that I'm looking for, I look at my users data, and I can look it up by a specific value. So in this case, ID, and whatever I get, I'm going to return this HTTP response, but I'm actually going to write the name of the user in there. And I don't know, I might as well make it an H1 so we could actually see it. Okay, so now let's see how this works. So I have users, right? And I try and get users 44, I see Benjamin Cohen. If I try and get users 21, I see Adam Kahan. If I try and get users 22, well, we got the number 22 because we made that big list with a range. What happens if I try and get user 1000? Well, this thing should only have 100 things in it. Oh, we actually get an error here. And that's because if we look we'll see, oh, we got an index error. And notice this has an error code of 500. What that's saying is the issue is not that the user provided a bad URL. The issue is that we at our end, writing our backend, did something wrong. So 500s are a good thing to wake up to and say, like, if you get a 400 when you're using someone else's website, that means you made a mistake, supposedly. If you get a 500, it means they know they made a mistake, or they do now if they have logs. Thought I heard someone say something for a second. Perhaps I did not.
That actually may have been me typing. I have a mechanical keyboard.
Yeah, no, you said that last time, but it generally is not sounding like typing. I hear little murmurs, but maybe that's my mic or something. But yeah, so what we've seen now are all the ideas we want you to see to begin with. We haven't learned how to work with a database yet or anything like that, but we're able to match URLs to specific handlers and do whatever we want, including return HTML from those handlers. And then specifically, we learned that not only can we write URLs, but we can write URLs that have essentially parameters in them and then use those parameters within that handler to do something specific. So we want to take questions at this point. Yep, go ahead, Adam.
Oh, I was going to say, I was wrong. The query string, the other example with the request.get, that's for the query string as opposed to a param. I'm not sure if it makes sense to look at that now or not, but I just...
Oh, interesting. Right.
Wanted to share that.
So we'll take questions first, but then we'll go with that. Any questions about what we've seen so far and this idea of URL parameters? Okay, well, based on the no response, I have to assume people understand well enough. The thing we sort of saw but didn't quite see was this idea here of a query string. So let's understand that. Okay, so let's say I have any one of these things, but let's go with another route, right? So when I look at another route, I get a specific page, this thing with the marquee, it says we can make as many routes as we want. Let me change that to saying something like this, which goes, another route handler. Let's forget about the status code business. We care about this idea of query strings. Okay, well, currently we're just going to print, we can make as many routes as we want. And then what is a query string? Well, there's a couple of different ways you could essentially pass information within a URL. Sorry, getting stuff out of the way. So one way is that URL parameter we saw, where we write something like another route 44, and then we would have, something like this string format, angle bracket thing to say, oh, that's a specific part of the URL we want to peel off and treat as a variable. So that is one approach, but you should know there's another approach. That other approach is called query strings, and it works like this. You've probably seen it on websites. At the end of your entire URL, whatever that is, you have a question mark. And after that question mark, you could have essentially different values, different key value pairs that you want to share from the URL to the handler. So I could have something like, maybe I'll have something, I'll just call it name, right? And then name equals, tell me if am I getting this quite right? Just name equals Ben. Let me try that. So you'll see, first of all, it's still going to the same site, right? So what we see at this end is that, can I see this? My screen is always being blocked by Zoom stuff. It's getting very frustrating. Right. So we got this, we see this. Oh, geez. I freaking hate. Okay, stop it, Zoom. Okay, we just have a blue line on the screen now. Is there any way just clear all drawings? I don't want drawings, Zoom. Okay, so we're trying to go to this route, another route, right? And it sees that it's this whole thing, another route, question mark, name equals Ben, but it's still matched up to just another route because query parameters don't count in terms of the actual URL. They're considered extra. But at the same time, we just saw the exact same thing. All we did was return, where is it? All we did was return this HTTP response with this marquee in it. So the question is, how can we peel off those query parameters? Well, we see here that the way we do that looks something like this, request.get. So this request we have here is an object like any other. And if I dot on it, I can find out what's in there. So interesting. It's not actually able to tell me what's in there, which is a little frustrating. But if I just have faith that this works, I can say dot get and the thing that I care about. In this case, it was called name, right? And then I'm going to store that, let's say, in a variable called name. And then I will print name just to see it come up. Okay, we're going to do it again. As you see, I have to go to the browser every time and reload. Otherwise, our server is none the wiser. Still looks the same, but we'll notice that we actually did print name here and it was Ben. And so if I wanted, I could say something like, we can make any, as many, you know, we're going to make this a query string. We can make as many name as we want. I got to add an F here probably. Okay, so now I'm going to save this. I go back and what does it say? We can make as many routes as we want, but I want to, oh, do I have to, is it that I didn't refresh, I think? We can make as many Ben as we want. Great, so it works. And then what happens if I leave that out, right? What if I don't have the query parameter in there? Okay, well, it still gets the right thing, but we can make as many none as we want. Okay, not exactly what we wanted. The problem is that when it looked for that query string name, it wasn't there. So we just got none. So I could easily fix that with a, what do you call it? A ternary operator. So I could say like request.get.name. Maybe I would even say, yeah, let's say name equals request.get.name. And then I would say name equals name if name else. And then that's where we would put our default. So my default in this case might be routes because that's what it was before. So I'll save that. And now if name happens to be none, because it's not actually in that query or in that, yeah, query parameter, then it's just going to show, well, we have to reload. We can make as many routes as we want. Cool. And again, if I add it back in there, it's going to be, I have to enter. If I add it back in there, we can make as many Ben as we want. And that should work for anything at all. And notably, that's not the only thing, as in you're not limited to one of these query parameters. You could have as many as you want. So at that point, you write and then I could say age equals 33, I guess. You'll notice here, one issue we might have is that everything in that query parameter by default is going to be interpreted as a string. So like I see name equals request.getName. Okay, so we have my name and the defaults for it. And then maybe after that, I would have age, the same thing. So I'm going to say age equals request.get age. And before giving it a default value or doing anything like that, I'm going to print both age and type of age, which I like to do because you don't always know what type you're getting, and that matters. So we're going to run this again. Shouldn't look too different here, but over here we see we did get, 33, but it's of type string. So maybe I would say below this something like, okay, not too different than this. And what we would call this sanitizing an input, as in we're definitely getting something called, we may or may not be getting something called age. if we do get it, we'll say, you know, age, if age, otherwise, whatever the default we want to be. So maybe the default age would be something like, you know, not a number. I don't know. It's not even in there. A man has no age. It's just going to be a string because Python doesn't really care. And yeah, I mean, maybe I do want to turn this into an integer. It doesn't really matter because we're about to put it in a string. So it doesn't really matter. But yeah, so finally we're going to write, we can make a, you know, I'll just write name is age years old. And so we have a solution for both of these. And so the way it works is that if I have my name in there and my age, I'll see, I like that the marquee keeps you guessing. I'll see Ben is 33 years old. If I take out just the age, I'll see Ben is a man has no age, years old. I could leave out, you know, just one. I could say age equals 36. And then get, you know, I have my default there. Adam is 36 years old. And again, I could have both. I could say name equals, what was he? And age equals, I mean, there's no number big enough. Quotes. Yeah, it doesn't need quotes. Oops. As we can hopefully see, it works. Cool. And so I think those are all the ideas we want to show you today. So we'll take questions in a second, but just to reiterate, the things we saw were, you know, your root URL, doing whatever you want there, possibly having another URL, having URLs with these URL parameters, as I would call them, peeling off something directly from the URL. And then we demonstrated with another route that even if we don't do this explicit thing, we can still pass data with this idea of query parameters. And that's all we're talking about today. So yeah, any questions, anything we want to discuss for the next 20 minutes we have?
This is, I guess, it's just a terminology question. So if I understand URL patterns, they effectively match URLs to specific actions. URLs are known as routes, and route handlers are whatever actions we want to take. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's so I would say it's like just like a dictionary or something. You have a key, and that key is a URL. And then the value is a function. And so this URL patterns object, or, you know, list, is all about matching up specific routes to specific functions. And importantly, because Django is aware, these functions aren't just any old function. They at the very least take one, or the contract of this function is that it's going to take a parameter called request and be provided information about who requested that URL, and it's expecting a response of a type that is valid. So either HTTP response or JSON response, something that you know, Django sees as a valid response to a request. But yeah, it's all about this URL pattern thing is all about just creating that connection between key and value.
Got it. Thanks.
Cool. Any other questions about this stuff? I know that I always found query parameters a little weird. It's an interesting idea, but it tends to be like ugly in practice, which is why I think there's, you know, people prefer this approach when they can. But it is cool that, like, you know, if we just went to a random site on Amazon, you would see just how much they do that. Like, we're just going to go I mean, I don't even want to show you my shopping history. You guys don't want to know. But like, let's say I was trying to buy a computer desk, apparently. You'll see how heavily they use it. As in, like, let's just read this Amazon URL to see what they're doing here, right? So I'm just going to go here and let's just try and break this down. Because it's a big old URL. So basically we're going to Amazon.com. This represents the root. So just like we say localhost, we're going to Amazon.com. And then the first thing we're seeing is /DP, which I'm assuming is a specific route. And then beyond that, there's a slash, and then it's this alphanumeric thing. And that is probably represented as some kind of parameter or URL parameter where they're going to say, maybe it's like, it's a string representing the item ID or something, the product ID. Cool. And then what happens after that? I suppose I should put these slashes here. So I'm just sort of breaking it down, even though this would all be one thing. What happens after that? Well, we have this thing ref equals, I mean, this is so specific, but notice that it comes before the question mark. So this has to be, I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming it's something like this, where it's actually expecting a string that looks like ref equals. And then maybe this whole part is represented by that parameter, which says like another string representing, I don't know, ref detail, whatever that is. And then finally, I mean, that's the whole URL as far as their routing is concerned. So it's going to grab two things off of it. But then finally, internally, they're able to look at all of their query parameters, and they have a lot. So I don't even want to look at all of them, but look at this PD_RD_I. There's some, specific code there, and then PD_RD_W. And so even though this is like impossible to read and meaningless to us, this is how Amazon is able to take sort of their base page, which is represented by, we're going to take everything out from that query parameter. So we're just having this, right? This is still going to get us to the same page. I have no idea what all those query parameters are doing, but you'll see it added some while I scrolled. So like this query parameter must represent some information that Amazon is tracking to say, oh, we want to give him a specific experience because we know who this person is. And so here's all the parameters that sort of define the unique experience we want to add to this. I think there's a lot you can get by just looking at URL, like just looking at how other companies design their URLs, because there's better or worse ways to do it, and you could see how complex of a abstraction a URL can be. It's just a string, but you can contain so much possible information in just that string. Yeah, I see Dave is mentioning Google handles your search with query parameters. So Amazon tends to be really complex with this stuff, but Google a little more straightforward. So like you see here, google.com, we just went to regular google.com. I very much don't want you to see my Google results. I'm sure I have something terrible in there. But yeah, so how is Google handling this? Well, there's a lot in here, but I don't even know what these other ones are. But if we ignore them, we'll see that if we do google.com/search, I guess we're going to take this out, right? Google.com/search just brings us to regular old Google search. Google.com/search with a query parameter. So, question mark, and then Q is the key, and then the value is Portuguese. If I do this, well, it gives me a Google page that has already done the search for me. So yeah, query parameters are a useful way of getting more, or a website getting more out of its route. So this route tells it what page to look at, but then internally they can look at this query parameter and say, oh, okay, they already provided me the query string. So I'm not just going to give them a blank page. I'll give them that page as if they already typed that in. Cool. So yeah, we're just taking questions on this because this is a new idea, and we've, like a lot of things, we just sort of showed you a couple of building blocks, but where you can take these building blocks if you continue to combine them is basically anywhere. They're powerful enough building blocks you can make any useful URL out of it. All right, anything else we want to see right now? It's a good question. Is Portuguese just Spanish? What are the chances? Okay. If we don't have any questions, we're going to start learning Portuguese. Then we're going to have a quiz on Portuguese. You guys don't want that.
What's the Portuguese word for lunch?
I wouldn't know because I know no Portuguese. But let me ask my friend eventually who lives in Brazil. How do you say lunch in Spanish? Or is that now they're not the same language? So that's wrong of me to suggest. Does anyone know? How do you say lunch in Spanish? How do you say lunch in Portuguese?
There is a lot of closeness because they're all Romance languages.
Mm. Yeah, my Romance language is emojis. I don't even know what that means. Cool. Okay, well, if people really don't have questions, we can break for lunch. But I'll stick around for a little bit. I mean, we haven't covered too many ideas, but there's certainly what to have questions about here. I suppose if we look at the actual assignment, I could see that, we could see the two things we have here. So might as well look at them. So what are our two assignments? I don't think I want to see that. Okay. First, we have Hello Django. The first part of which is about getting set up. And then we want you to create a bunch of URLs with various, URL parameters, eventually no query strings, and, to return something appropriate based on it. Essentially, this is just now your API for finding out about like shapes. Okay, and this one is about creating some kind of simple to-do page. I'm going to look into this a little more. I think this is a little concerning because we did not cover how to include all of this stuff in your, we haven't covered how to create your, like how to serve up your own specific HTML file with, all these various things in it. So this one might be a little out of scope. But we'll look at that. And then, Hello Django would be the place to start, I guess, because it's actually testing what we talked about today. Cool. Let's see what's in the chat. Okay, so Almaco, I'm probably not saying that right. I'm assuming that symbol underneath means something. But that would be lunch in Portuguese, am I right? Okay. All right, yeah, so guys, feel free to break. This is the end. See you all at 1:30. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to stop recording.